Welcome to the next part of our series on the Talesphony channel, where we explore one of the most mysterious and controversial stories of the 20th century, the Montauk Project. Today, we will go deeper into the mystery of Fort Hero and learn about technology that seems almost unimaginable. In previous episodes, we talked about experiments that, although extraordinary, could still have some justification within the technology of the time: radars, advanced communicators, and even early computers. However, what happened next takes us to a completely different level, an area where technology intertwines with the mind in a way that may seem almost unreal. You're listening to Talesphony Podcast, your weekly dose of tales. In the 1950s, the American company ITT, known for its advanced electronics technology, began experiments on creating a machine that would have the ability to read minds. As part of this research, a device known as the chair was created. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary chair, but its construction concealed extraordinary secrets. The Montauk Chair, as this device was called, worked in conjunction with electromagnetic coils, which were arranged around in the form of a pyramid. Each of these coils was capable of detecting changes in the aura of the person sitting in the chair. According to researchers, the aura, the subtle energy surrounding every living being, changed its intensity and frequency during mental activity, in particular when the person focused on a thought or visualization. And now we come to the most interesting part. These changes in the aura were recorded by the coils and transmitted to the computers of the time. In this case, we are talking about one of the first supercomputers, which was Cray 1. This computer was tasked with processing data from the coils, analyzing the vibrations of the aura, and transforming them into a form understandable to the human mind. But don't think that it was only about reading thoughts. The aim of these studies was not only to track, but also to control the mind. The chair, combined with these advanced technologies, was supposed to be able to record thoughts, but also, according to some sources, allow for the projection of these thoughts outward. This is where the story becomes even more improbable. According to reports and stories from people involved with the Montauk Project, the chair could act as a kind of portal. A person sitting in it could imagine various scenarios, and the machine was able to transfer these ideas into reality. Imagine this. A person sitting in the chair could imagine a place or event with their eyes closed, and the machine, thanks to advanced technology, could make it happen. In some cases, there's even talk of time travel, creating alternate realities, and even manipulating the physical environment through thoughts alone. This is where the story begins to move beyond the boundaries of ordinary science and enter areas that we would today call science fiction. The experiments with the chair also had serious consequences for the people who took part in them. Many of them experienced severe mental problems when their minds were forced to confront the new reality. Their minds were somehow stretched beyond their natural limits. There were cases where some subjects claimed to have been transported to other places or even other times, which adds to the mysticism and mystery of the story. There is one more question in the background of these experiments. Who was behind all this? Some people believe that they were secret government agencies that wanted to use this technology for military and intelligence purposes. Is it possible that the Montauk Project was just the beginning of a larger operation related to the manipulation of time, space, and mind? The computer began to process the electromagnetic field that was generated around the person sitting in the chair. It recorded it, but unfortunately it still could not fully read the mind. It only managed to record the frequencies and waves generated by the mind, but it was still unclear how to read and interpret them. Many attempts were made, but in the end it turned out that one computer was not enough. An additional system was needed that could decode these signals. A second computer was connected for this purpose, this time a more advanced IBM 360 model, which was to control the operation of the Cray 1. It was then that the research gained momentum, and the experiments began to bring increasingly surprising results. The experiments continued throughout the 1950s, but one day information about these studies leaked out of the laboratories at Fort Hero and reached people associated with Montauk. Those who learned about the project immediately decided to move the chair to the Montauk base. The device was immediately ordered to be transported, and a special building was set up at the base, where the chair and the electromagnetic coils surrounding it were modified. Preston Nichols mentions in his book that the technology associated with the chair had an unusual extraterrestrial origin. He claims that the idea of creating a device capable of reading thoughts and even creating reality came from a civilization in the Sirius system. It was from them that the American government was supposed to receive the plans for this device, plans that were later used to create the Montauk Chair. Of course, this was not a ready-made technology, but rather an idea, a scheme that scientists had to transform into a real device. The technology of the chair, although based on terrestrial devices, was therefore based on extraterrestrial ideas. That is why the Montauk researchers, as Nichols claims, were fully aware that although they were operating within the limits of human technology, their work was based on blueprints provided by another, much more advanced civilization. Let's look at it more technically now. A person sat in a chair, around which electromagnetic coils were placed. These coils were the ones that amplified the aura, or subtle energy generated by the body. The aura itself was too weak to be easily detected, so the coils acted as amplifiers, allowing these microscopic energy changes to be recorded. The whole system worked like a transmitter. The signals generated by the body were amplified and then sent to a receiver, a computer, which was supposed to process this data. This process was very complicated, and it took many years to find a way to read these signals. The experiments were long and tedious, but eventually scientists managed to get the first image of what a person was thinking displayed on a monitor. Although the initial results were only two-dimensional, Preston Nichols claims that they were later able to generate three-dimensional thought images as well. Visualizations of what the person was imagining while sitting in the chair. Further experiments with the chair developed at a surprising pace. Duncan, who was the main participant in these studies, initially only visualized objects on the monitor, which in itself was a great breakthrough. He imagined places, objects, and even people, and all this appeared on the screen in the form of images. The researchers were amazed that it was possible to transfer thoughts to visualization so directly. However, it did not stop there. Cameron eventually began to create more complex scenes, not only static images but entire dynamic environments. Preston Nichols described that after some time, as part of further experiments, Cameron began to influence not only the image visible on the screen, but the physical reality around him. His thoughts and ideas, which at first seemed to be only mental projections, began to manifest in reality. At first, these were minor changes. Objects moved or changed their place in the room where the experiments were taking place. The scientists saw the potential of this phenomenon and directed the research towards trying to fully control this ability. The chair, as Nichols claimed, became the central element of this project, and its technology was constantly being developed. He mentioned the need for more precise coupling of electromagnetic signals with the brain of the person sitting in the chair. The next step was to connect advanced electromagnetic coils, which were to strengthen the field around Cameron, which supposedly would allow him to be even better attuned to the machine. After some time, the experiments began to take on a more disturbing character. Nichols recalled that when Cameron fully controlled his mental projections, it began to be noticed that some of them did not disappear after the equipment was turned off. These were objects and entities that went beyond ordinary hallucinations. The most spectacular example was supposed to be the manifestation of physical objects, things that did not exist in a given room before, suddenly appeared there. Finally, it was time for more risky experiments. According to Nichols, Cameron was not only to create images or objects, but also to create entire environments in which he could mentally be. Researchers began experimenting with transporting him to different dimensions or worlds that were created solely by his mind. All of this happened within controlled conditions, but Cameron's technology and abilities were constantly pushing the boundaries of what had been possible before. During these experiments, something even more disturbing was discovered. The researchers noticed that as Cameron sat in the chair and immersed himself in the worlds he created, he began to lose his sense of reality. The lines between what was real and what was a figment of his mind began to blur. At one point, Cameron had trouble distinguishing where his imagination ended and the real world began. These experiments had far-reaching effects not only on Cameron, but also on those involved. Nichols recalls that after a while, it became increasingly difficult to control what Cameron was creating. In one of the most dramatic experiments, Preston claims, Duncan allegedly imagined a huge, unknown creature that began to materialize at the Montauk base, prompting the immediate cessation of the experiments. At that point, it became clear that the technology the scientists were using had gotten out of hand. What began to happen next was beyond imagination. According to Preston, Duncan Cameron began to achieve astonishing results that both fascinated and frightened scientists. The more Cameron focused on selected objects, the more the computer he was connected to adapted its operation to his thoughts. The programmers who supervised the system's operation gained more and more control over the configuration of the devices with each passing day. One day, during one of the experiments, an unexpected event occurred. The object Duncan focused on materialized in his hand. It happened so suddenly that everyone present was surprised, almost terrified. The object was tangible, you could touch it, and yet it was created only as a result of Cameron's thought. Although at first it was treated with reserve, the repeatability of this phenomenon made people start to take it more seriously. Cameron, with subsequent experiments, had better and better control over this process. He felt that his mind was entering a kind of training, which allowed him to form and materialize thoughts with increasing precision. However, with these successes came complications. Objects that Cameron was able to materialize began to disappear as suddenly as they appeared. Scientists noticed that objects ceased to exist when Cameron stopped concentrating on them, or when the devices supporting his mental experiments were turned off. Eventually, it was discovered that the Montauk base's radar was interfering with the course of these processes, causing objects to appear in different places or even with a delay. This interference resulted from reflections of electromagnetic waves that affected the operation of computer systems and devices. In response to these anomalies, scientists decided to move the chair in which Cameron was sitting to another location on the island, to the secret headquarters of the ITT Corporation. Preston suggested that this institution could be where further, even more advanced experiments could take place. Cameron was to continue his experiments with materializing objects and transmitting thoughts remotely, but problems with controlling these processes began to multiply. Over time, objects began to appear with a delay in different places, and scientists were unable to explain why this was happening. It was soon discovered that Cameron's chair could be used not only to materialize objects, but also to transmit images and thoughts remotely. This discovery was of great importance, especially in the context of potential use in espionage. Imagine an agent who no longer needs any devices to take pictures. He just needs to focus on the image, and his thoughts will be transferred to the headquarters. What Cameron was able to achieve could revolutionize the way intelligence operations are conducted. After further tests, the chair was taken back to Montauk Base, where a special building was built just for this device. Scientists were still learning how to best use its capabilities, and Cameron himself became more and more adept at manipulating reality. With each subsequent experiment, it turned out that his abilities reached further than initially thought. It wasn't just images and objects that could be transmitted. Cameron could enter other people's minds. For example, experiments were conducted with a piece of hair or skin of a person on whom Cameron was to focus. When Duncan held such an object, he was able to telepathically connect with its owner, feeling what the person felt, seeing what they saw. As he developed this ability, it turned out that he could even control the actions of a person, directing them according to his own will. This discovery caused quite a stir, especially in the context of the technological possibilities that were beginning to come to light. Cameron, sitting in an armchair, aided by coils and antennas sending out waves, could affect people in ways that had previously seemed impossible. The noise we hear is the chaos resulting from the lack of anchoring in the 0 point. At this point, a key moment of the experiments came. It was discovered that this 0 point is not just a theoretical construct, but a real, tangible part of every living thing, every particle of matter. What was supposed to be at first just an attempt to manipulate time turned into an understanding of the foundation of existence. Every form, every being, functions thanks to this point. The scientists, led by Preston and Cameron, realized that by manipulating this 0 point, they were able to control not only matter, but also the thoughts and minds of people. This was a breakthrough moment, when the experiments moved to a more personal, more disturbing level. Duncan, as a medium for these experiments, became a tool through which the researchers began to penetrate the minds of other people. Using a hair or a fragment of a person's skin, Duncan was able to enter their consciousness. Everyone was shocked when it was discovered that he could not only observe the world through the eyes of this person, but also control their actions. As the experiments progressed, their effects became increasingly difficult to control. Initial successes, such as the materialization of objects or the manipulation of thoughts, turned into something more unpredictable. It was noticed that if anything interfered with the operation of the apparatus, the results were chaotic. Materializations were delayed or appeared in different places, thoughts became unstable, and people subjected to Duncan's influence began to lose control of their behavior. Everything indicated that manipulating the 0 point introduced disruptions to the natural order of things. During these experiments, scientists also discovered that this 0 point, a kind of space-time node, affects the way people perceive reality. Everything we perceive as real is anchored to this point. Understanding this mechanism could open the door to the manipulation of reality on a scale never before seen by humanity. The ability to create objects from thoughts, transfer information telepathically, and even control people was becoming more and more possible. Unfortunately, the technology was still too unstable. Furthermore, as Duncan delved deeper into these experiments, his mind began to dissipate. Instead of precisely controlling materializations and telepathic connections, his thoughts began to blend with reality, leading to increasingly unpredictable results. Preston and Cameron realized that to go further, they had to further develop the 0 point technology and create a stable connection to this field. As a result, further research into this technology led to the creation of the so-called zero-time reference generator, which was supposed to allow for the stabilization of the 0 point connection. Tesla, a pioneer in electromagnetic field research, discovered that stable time fields could be generated, which could be used to anchor reality to a single point. This generator was capable of synchronizing with the Earth's natural magnetic field, which in theory would allow for the manipulation of not only time, but space as well. During one of the more advanced experiments, when the chair and generator were used simultaneously, another, even more surprising effect occurred. Duncan focused on a single point in space, and as a result, began to see images from the future. Scientists realized that they were able to not only manipulate the present, but also gain insight into future events. This discovery terrified them because it opened up completely new possibilities, but at the same time raised questions about ethics and the limits of what could be achieved with technology. The closer they got to discovering the true potential of the 0 point, the more they realized the dangers it posed. A stable connection to that year was then built and time jump tests began. Duncan, who was sitting in the chair, was able to go through the time tunnel to a specific point in the future and back, which confirmed the functionality of the entire system. During this experiment, it was noticed that time in the tunnel behaved in a nonlinear way. It was possible to manipulate the direction, go backwards, or speed up at a specific moment, which was previously impossible. However, the tunnel was not always stable, leading to the risk of getting stuck in space-time. As the experiments progressed, it was discovered that moving larger objects and even people required much more energy. More power was needed to stabilize these tunnels so that they could maintain a stable form for a longer period of time. This was one of the main problems the team had to face, as the risk of the tunnel breaking could lead to unpredictable consequences. In 1979, it was decided to further expand the infrastructure, strengthening the antennas and adding additional power sources. New devices were also introduced to improve the energy stability of the wormhole and minimize the risk of losing control over its operation. A key step in this process was the use of technology from the Orionids, who provided plans for advanced energy generators and space-time stabilization mechanisms. With these technologies, experiments could be continued on a larger scale, allowing for more precise control of time jumps. However, the tests also brought new challenges. It was noticed that although Duncan could travel through time, his body was beginning to show some unusual reactions. Changes in molecular structure appeared, suggesting that long-term exposure to the wormhole could lead to unknown biological consequences. Some scientists began to speculate that transporting people through time could affect their health in ways that were not yet understood. Despite these challenges, the experiments continued. Duncan traveled through time again, including to the past, where they attempted to recreate historical events and analyze how changes in the past could affect the present. Each of these expeditions provided new information about the nature of time and space and how human consciousness is connected to the 0 points that are a fundamental part of the structure of the universe. During this time, the team working on the project became increasingly aware that time manipulation could have serious consequences. There was a risk of destabilizing the entire system, as well as unpredictable changes to reality if something went wrong. Once the 0 point was established, it was possible to move freely through time. They determined that the reference time point for their experiments would be August 12, 1983. So, based on the data collected and the system created, anyone who sat in the chair would have the ability not only to travel to the year 1990, but also to return to the set point in time. During the initial tests, Preston and his team noticed that passing through the time tunnel they created seemed safe but required extreme precision. However, questions arose about the stability of these passages. In any case, the military scientific institutions that supervised the project began to wonder what the consequences of such a journey could be. At the same time, research on natural time tunnels was leading to interesting discoveries. It turned out that natural anomalies occur every 20 years in the vicinity of Montauk, which could be observed in 1943, 1963, 1983, and so on. These regular cycles suggested that the place had special properties that could be used for further research. With all this, Preston pointed out an important element: the need to use not only technology, but also meditation skills, so that the person in the chair could fully concentrate on the task. Each time journey was demanding, and the energy needed to perform it was significant. As the research progressed, the team came to the conclusion that their experiments were based on existing technology. It was then that the idea of building a second antenna came up, to strengthen the signal and increase the stability of the connections. However, planning the construction required significant technical and financial resources, which was not easy in the context of the increasingly tense atmosphere at the base. When the Orion Delta T antenna was finally completed, measuring 100 meters in diameter and 35 meters high, Preston was full of hope. It allowed for a much better connection to the 0 point, as well as efficient power generation for subsequent experiments. After completing the tests, it turned out that the team could control the time-space with unprecedented precision. However, as the experiments began to attract more attention, the situation at the base began to deteriorate. Concerns grew as the military leadership began to impose new restrictions. At one point, the command decided to limit only civilian employees to further research in order to limit military access to classified information. Despite these restrictions, Preston and his team continued their research, testing new methods and exploring the mysteries of time. Their ambition to understand the nature of time wormholes led them to discoveries that seemed impossible to explain within the framework of current physics. It was clear to Preston and his colleagues that they were on the threshold of a revolutionary change in the understanding of space-time. Meanwhile, as the new research developed, mysterious events began to occur at the base. Employees reported seeing unfamiliar phenomena that seemed to be the result of their experiments. The atmosphere of tension and uncertainty began to grow, and Preston's team realized that they had to proceed cautiously so as not to cross the line that could lead to disaster. And so, their research continued, and each new day brought new challenges and discoveries that questioned everything that had been considered certain in science and technology. However, there were beliefs that organizations such as MUFON were influenced by various groups that had their own interests. Ultimately, regardless of the speculations, Preston and his team continued their research into the mysterious aspects of time travel. It was understood that for any time travel, regardless of direction, it was necessary to establish a reference point in time, which in their case was August 12, 1983. Once at this point, one could travel in any direction, both into the future and the past, but returns had to be made first to the reference point. From the perspective of the research team, this principle of operation proved to be crucial in the context of the experiments. During these studies, many extraordinary discoveries were made. Among other things, they managed to materialize thoughts and control other people's behavior. Images could be transmitted remotely in 3 dimensions, which opened up new possibilities in communication and interpersonal interaction. They also managed to travel through time safely, minimizing the noise that usually appeared when using communication devices. The team also investigated issues related to earlier experiments conducted on the USS Eldridge, where, according to Preston, some of the principles of their device came from. It was believed that their technology was more advanced and effective, which allowed for full control over time travel. Since the early 1980s, this technology could be used in various military applications, which raised concerns about the ethics of such activities. As the research progressed, Preston's team began to notice that their results, data, and documentation were being shared with various government agencies, raising questions about the transparency of their work. In turn, some researchers and critics began to express doubts about the veracity of their findings, leading to a schism within the scientific and ufological community. On the one hand, there were skeptical voices, such as MUFON, who considered the research a fraud, questioning its scientific basis. On the other hand, some in the alternative community began to see MUFON as a monitoring tool that did not allow for a full understanding of time and space-related phenomena. In this atmosphere of tension, Preston and his team had to face not only technological challenges, but also internal divisions within their community. Each new research session brought new discoveries, but also new questions that required thought and analysis. Over time, they realized that not only technical, but also ethical aspects of their actions were looming on the horizon, which could affect the future of not only them, but also of all humanity. Thank you for joining us on this episode. In the last few moments, we have explored the extraordinary events related to the Montauk Project, from time travel to unknown technologies. If you are fascinated by this topic, you cannot miss the next part of the series, which will be the last one, Part 4 of the Montauk Project. We will look deeper into the secrets of this experimental project, uncovering more controversies and theories that surround this case. We promise many surprises and surprising information. We encourage you to subscribe to stay up to date and hear you soon in our last part.